Hi, y'all. We're talking about how to get started on Project One today, which is writing your personal narrative. What we've done so far in this class is look at three texts that used a strong component of narrative, storytelling, and now we're going to back up and talk about exactly what it is they were doing and how we're going to do it too. We're going to cover how to define narratives and why they're important, and then we're going to talk about possible ways to structure and plan your Project One, think about considerations of rhetorical situation, and then end up with some final tips on beating writer's block. When we say narrative, what we mean is story, as distinct from a recitation of pure facts. Narrative writing makes a point by telling a series of events in time about characters, often, but not always people, in a setting. Narratives are known for using lots of detail. Note, storytelling doesn't mean lying or making things up. It means a mode of giving information that's based on showing a chain of events about characters. In his book, Minds Made for Stories, composition scholar Thomas Newkirk talks about stories as a mode of understanding. He's talking about the way that telling stories is central to the way we understand ourselves, what we've done, what we want to do, what kind of people we are, and also our larger histories as people, like family stories or national histories. There are scholars who make it their life's work to understand humanity through the stories we have told. The way cultures have told creation myths, for example, become serious historical artifacts that reveal basic truths and sometimes cross-cultural similarities between people. So independent of whether a particular story is true, a narrative theorist would say that it is revealing of something true about people. It's important to note that when we talk about telling stories, we are bringing our specific viewpoints to a set of facts. So without lying at all about facts, I could give a very different spin to a common story. Understanding this helps us understand how bias really works. It's usually not lying, it's just people with specific viewpoints sharing facts. So where do we see narrative? In life, we use narrative when we want to tell someone about something we did or something we want to do. In studying history, we understand history as stories where the characters might be individual people, like George Washington, or maybe where the characters are national actors, like the British monarchy. We tell stories in terms of events of a series of events in time, as the causes behind the events and as the effects of laws and policies. Working in medicine, every semester, faculty who teach nursing tell us about how important it is that working as nurses involves being good at taking case histories, gathering the stories of patients. In studying trades, helping someone understand what they did to break their air conditioner or their computer and explain what kind of process is involved in the repairs. So, why use narrative? Using stories can help us make a logical point by showing a clear cause and effect. It can help us draw on emotions of readers by showing them a human face of how someone is impacted by a law or event, like with this example that takes us from the general concerns over a hurricane to the specific effects on an individual people. Our personal narratives can help develop our credibility as members of a community or as people who understand a specific problem. In this class, we'll use our stories specifically to develop our credibility as students, who can therefore speak to the needs of students. Here's an example of how an organization that advocates for immigrants presented the value of DACA. How do they use her story to show a logical case for the value of DACA in an emotional case? Writing narratives also requires some specific writing skills that you'll need in all different kinds of writing in college and in the real world. Using detail, writing our personal stories is a great format to practice showing and telling, and using effective details, creating the kind of writing that makes readers want to keep reading. Developing our credibility. We're all experts on ourselves and our own experiences, and by taking the time to tell those experiences well and bring those experiences to class, we'll learn more and better. Finding a voice. As we move into academic writing, it gets harder and harder to feel any ownership over our words. That's why we start here. Explaining evidence and examples. This is one of the harder things about writing, and trying to get other people to understand our stories is a perfect place to work on it. And making a point in a way that engages an audience. As we go through the semester, we'll incorporate elements of storytelling, both personal stories and stories of other people and events, to help make our points. Our first unit, though, will focus on personal narrative, specifically a personal story about education and learning. Next, we want to talk about structures we can use for our narratives, that is, the parts of the project and how we can put them together. It will help a lot for you to have read over the Project 1 assignment sheet before getting to this part. If you go back to the outlines you've made for each of our three authors, you can get a good sense of some different ways to put together an essay. McCabe gave us a quick taste of her point, then jumped into her story and brought that back to her main point. Tim Urban gave us a more traditional hook defining procrastination, and then moved back and forth between his own experience as a procrastinator and more general observations about procrastination. Mike Rose began his story of his mother as his hook, then gave us his point and moved back into another story of his uncle. As you go back, you could look at the way they weave together personal storytelling with more general analysis. I suggest going back and watching or rereading with these questions in mind. As you get started with drafting, please remember that this is not a standard 5-paragraph essay. I need you to focus on one single thing. Have a thesis that tells your audience one thing you want them to take away from your story, not 3 points. Part of getting started needs to be considering your audience too. Once you've identified a story you want to tell and considered audience and purpose, you can move to thesis. I want you to have a general idea of your thesis, a main single thing you want to say that captures why your story is important, but you do not need to and probably should not worry about specific wording of your thesis statement until you're revising your whole project. Just get the ideas down. Remember that it may be the introduction or the conclusion or both. Coming up with the idea of your thesis is best done by answering a question. What do you want your audience to learn? What do you hope your audience does differently after reading? Why is your story important? A thesis statement should help us understand one of these questions or one like them. When we get to more academic writing, I'll tell you that I'm a big fan of write the introduction last. For a personal narrative, though, your first question is actually whether you will even have an introduction. You might have a pretty traditional introduction. This is a good choice if you want to write the kind of essay you might use in a transfer or scholarship application. You might jump right into your story and delay your thesis to the end. This is more common with more creative writing type essays. Or you might do what Mike Rose did and begin with a big chunk of story as a hook before coming into your more formal introduction. If you go for a more formal introduction, I do encourage you to think about your hook. One of the big pitfalls I see is people choosing a very generic hook such that you might end up with multiple essays that start with the same quote or the same definition, even when they're not about the same topic. For that reason, I'm a big fan of starting with a story. You can also consider starting with an open question, a definition, or a quote, but you need to be really thoughtful so that you don't end up being boring or cliche. I've tried to lay out some bare bones outlines here of the way you might approach some general structures. The application essay format is very traditional. The story in a story can combine a story of current you with a story of past you and can be quite clever and creative, especially to show either growth or continued struggle. Our 3 texts we've looked at together have all given us examples of woven stories that move from personal experience to analysis and discussion. And in the case of Tim Urban, that also involved drawings. This is a complex structure, but it's a really good one for practicing a more academic kind of narrative structure. The delayed thesis story can be dangerous. It's easy to lose your audience if they're not sure why they're reading your story. So you need to be thoughtful about those pink houses and choruses. Think about keywords that you can repeat in a way that gives them a sense of where it's going. And please note, if you use dialogue, you need to put a paragraph break each time someone speaks in a conversation. Depending on your overall structure, your conclusion might be the only spot where we get your thesis, or it might be a spot where you're bringing us back to your thesis. In general, I'm less a fan of directly copy pasting a thesis and more about restating it, as in stating the idea in a new way. I also want you to make sure you're leaving your reader with an answer to so what? Why was this important? Hopefully answered by your thesis. And what now? What do you want your audience to do differently now that they've heard your story? As you start drafting, I recommend that you begin with free writing and get ideas down. Then refine audience and purpose to get your thesis in order. Then move to structures. As you're writing, consider the places where you could add really good showing spots versus where you may be doing briefer with telling. Don't be afraid to make a time to meet with me if you want to talk about options. Some rhetorical considerations to get you going. As we've already covered, you need to define your audience. Make sure you're planning your thesis and everything else with a specific audience in mind. Consider teachers who need to hear what things are like for students, parents to whom you want to show appreciation, younger family members who need to learn from things that happened to you, other students who might benefit from what you've figured out or just might relate to you. Literally anyone can be your audience, but really think about it. As you consider audience, consider language. Make language choices consistent with what will reach your audience. Don't forget about your classmates and teacher, your secondary audience. Who will listen more to formal English? Who will listen more to informal English? Are there ways to include home languages if your audience is family? As we discussed, your story is a way to develop your credibility as a speaker. Make sure you're considering how you are showing your audience that you are a person with knowledge and experience worth hearing. You can also consider the specific emotional impact you want to make. The way you choose to describe a situation or focus on events might be geared towards making your audience laugh or feel sad or feel angry. Make sure you're considering how to have the impact you want to have. Finally, remember that our goal is to offer some kind of knowledge to our audience, and your story serves as a way to show the value of something you've learned, like evidence of your thesis. And I want to remind you about some strategies if you feel like you're struggling with writer's block. Try free writing or even listing just to get ideas going. You don't have to use what you write, but it might help get flowing. Make an appointment with a writing tutor or with me. Reread or rewatch our example narratives. Jump around in your project and work on a different paragraph or idea. Take breaks. Your brain can only be on one topic for so long. Remember to take care of yourself. Using your brain requires nutrition, sleep, and hydration. When you're feeling stuck, doing physical activity or meditation can be a good way to reset your brain. Remember the advice Tim Urban left us with, which was to show yourself that you can do it. So get started. Remember that meeting with a tutor is a mandatory part of your grade, and you can do that appointment by email if nothing else fits your schedule. So make sure you're getting that set up and not waiting. You can also make an appointment with me if you want to check in about whether you're on the right track. Be willing to experiment and ready to share with your classmates, and get started.